On August 11, 1938, at Floyd Bennett Field in New York, a historic milestone is set. It had been just over a month since the American Joe Louis had defeated fellow pugilist Max Schmeling, and just over a month before a deal was to be reached in Munich, Germany. A Nazi plane, the Brandenburg, landed in the Big Apple, setting a new world record from Berlin to New York. In just under 25 hours, this Focke-Wulf Condor 200 crosses the Atlantic non-stop into the heart of American financial power. The airstrip had been world-renowned. Floyd Bennett Field was where Willie Post would break the world record after circling across the globe. It had also been where Douglas Corrigan would get his nickname, when instead of flying to California, he would travel the wrong way, towards Ireland. And now, it would be the site of a Nazi world record.
A Focke-Wulf 200 Condor took off from Berlin, Starken, and flew across the Atlantic, and then landed at New York Airfield non-stop. This caused major consternation in the USA because no one had expected that. Although the airliner itself was basically one large fuel tank, from external views it looked like a perfectly normal aeroplane with passenger seats. But that was just the appearance of this thing flying over New York and then landing there. That caused major reconsiderations in the US, certainly by the senior military people, that perhaps they should look into this a little bit more seriously.
Welcomed by a roaring crowd, German pilots began a whirlwind tour of the city. However, one person who would not be there to greet them was New York's mayor and staunch anti-Nazi, Fiorello LaGuardia, who decided to boycott the event. After 2 days, the pilots would fly back to the fatherland, and after more than 3 years, the two nations would be at war with each other. The Battle of Britain would live in infamy as one of the key moments of the Second World War, and it tested no one more than the commander of the Luftwaffe, Hermann Goering. After working in tandem with the Wehrmacht to conquer Western Europe, now the Luftwaffe would be on their own in a first strike against Great Britain. With so many victories behind them, it would take something special to stop the advance of Germany's incredible air force. Luckily for Britain, the investment in radio direction finding technology, later known as radar, would be the key to halting the German war machine in its tracks, delaying any chance of a possible land invasion. Radar installations along the coastline would detect incoming German aircraft through the reflection of their radio signals. The chain home RDF facilities located along England's coast allowed for formations of Luftwaffe aircraft to be picked up as they were organizing even above their own airfields. When the incoming aircraft were confirmed to be moving in by the Observer Corps, the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, stationed in a decoding center, would use all the gathered intelligence to move color-coded representations of the units across a map table. This complex system of detection filtered down to the fighter controller, who could then estimate where the enemy aircraft were headed. This allowed the RAF to scramble units and have them best positioned to repel the invading forces. This system was a major factor in England's defense strategy that saw them turn back Goring's previously unstoppable force. The V-1 missile's pulse jet engine. This key component of a German weapon would eventually be used in an effort to circumvent radar defenses, but it would not be used by Germany. After the war, the usefulness of this type of artillery would be considered by many of the world's major powers as a new step in warfare. Simple to construct and very cost-effective, the V-1 was a weapon that terrified Great Britain and perhaps could serve as an inspiration for future weaponry. Not only was the V-1 cost-effective, but it also had flexibility on its side. Its ability to be launched from a ramp, sled, or from an aircraft made it very interesting, and the US military would commission their own version of the V-1, with plans to use it in attacks on Japan. But with radar technology becoming more and more advanced, perhaps a future use for such missiles could be as a countermeasure, one that would disrupt the enemy's radar system. In California, a key to further developing these ideas was underway. The Radioplane Company was producing radio-controlled drones that the U.S. military was using as targets to train anti-aircraft gunners. Radioplane had begun life as a company to create hobby planes, and was founded by Reginald Denny, a former British pilot during World War I, who moved to Hollywood as a stunt pilot and actor. As World War II inched closer, their radio control technology could be seen as useful for practical military use. As the war progressed, the company became further and further drawn away from the hobby world. This would benefit one employee greatly, as a military cameraman photographed a young radioplane technician to start off her modeling career. The technician, Norma Jean Baker, would soon change her name to Marilyn Monroe. Using the radio control technology and marrying it to low-cost pulse jet engine, Radioplane created the GAM-67 Crossbow. Mounted under the wings of a B-47 for testing, this missile was to be used to hone in on and destroy enemy ground radar systems. Another proposal was to use the Crossbow as an electronic countermeasure drone to jam enemy radars. It could also be used as a target drone or to perform battlefield surveillance. The pulse jet engine was eventually replaced with a turbojet, and the straight-winged cigar-shaped crossbow could reach speeds of 675 miles per hour. 14 crossbows were built, but because of technical difficulties and as newer, more sophisticated systems were under development, the project was cancelled in 1957. November 29, 1963. 1 week after President Kennedy's assassination, a meeting between new President Lyndon Johnson and his National Security Council was arranged. Present was Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, a closely trusted advisor to both Kennedy and Johnson. Also at that meeting was Secretary of State Dean Rusk, Special Assistant McGeorge Bundy, and CIA Director John McCone. The issue was the secret project currently underway at Lockheed Skunk Works. The aircraft, capable of Mach 3, an elevation of 100,000 feet, and a low radar cross-section, began during the Eisenhower era under the code name Oxcart. Giving the U.S. a huge advantage over the Soviets in aerial reconnaissance, the project was enthusiastically supported throughout the Kennedy years. The question now was, should the administration release any information about this state-of-the-art plane to the world? McNamara favored complete disclosure to the press. If information about the A-12 was revealed, it would severely weaken the case for another Mach 3 plane also being developed, the astronomically expensive B-70 Valkyrie, a bomber that was already obsolete and high on the Secretary of Defense's chopping block. Opposing the early release was McCone and Bundy. In a shrewd calculation, it was suggested that the president instead wait until closer to his re-election the following year, realizing that the plane, with all of its technological breakthroughs, could be used as political capital. It was the plan favored by Kennedy before he died, said Bundy. Johnson, after careful consideration, decided to hold off on Oxcart, or as LBJ said, keep his powder dry. In February of 1964, however, with Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona, a top contender for the presidency, telling the American people that both the Kennedy and Johnson administrations had failed in sponsoring any new aircraft projects, LBJ decided to fire back. The result of the press conference caused the program to split into two different directions. The YF-12 interceptor, mistakenly called the A-11 by the president, was sent to Edwards Air Force Base as an overt program. The reconnaissance spy plane, which later became known as the world-famous SR-71, would instead remain black. Douglas, makers of the world-famous DC-3, a revolutionary commercial aircraft that defined the golden age of flight. Used by the major American airlines, this twin-engine design made the airplane the preferred mode of transportation, providing both luxury and comfort for its up to 24 passengers. It is this airplane that puts Douglas on the map. By late 1941, with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Douglas goes to work for the United States government, producing some of the best transport aircraft in the world. The C-47 Skytrain, an evolution of the DC-3, flies in both materials and manpower during the Second World War. Most notably during the battle for Guadalcanal and over the dangerous hump from India to China. This workhorse, also known as the Dakota, is put to use after the war during the Berlin airlift, providing food and materials to the people of West Berlin. In addition to transport planes throughout World War II, Douglas solidifies its image as the makers of superb military aircraft. The Douglas Dauntless is used throughout the Pacific Campaign as a torpedo bomber. The A-26 Invader, a twin-engine light bomber, is used not only in the war against Japan, but also against communist North Korea and during the early stages of the Vietnam conflict, having a lifespan of over 20 years. One Douglas design that is rarely mentioned by historians is the XB-19, a four-engine heavy bomber made under pressure by the United States government. Being extremely difficult to build and possessing a gigantic price tag, this plane is only used for studying the problems associated with large bomber aircraft. Wheeled out in June of 1941, the only XB-19 ever produced is scrapped 8 years later. Douglas learns its lesson, letting its rival Boeing deal with all of the headaches associated with building gigantic four-engine bombers. Another experimental aircraft built by Douglas during the war years is an oddly designed twin-engine bomber, the XB-42 Mixmaster. Having two counter-rotating propellers placed at the tail of the airplane, the purpose is to increase speed while reducing drag significantly. It is a concept similar to Germany's Dornier 335, based on the principle of centerline thrust propulsion, keeping the airplane on the straight and narrow in case one of its engines fails. The hope is that the Mixmaster can achieve the range of the B-29 Superfortress without its cost and size. Being tested in May of 1944, 1 month before the invasion of France, the XB-42 achieves a speed record of over 400 miles per hour. Unfortunately for Douglas, the Mixmaster is never put into mass production. With both Germany and Japan defeated, the need for an experimental long-range bomber evaporates. And with new jet technology about to burst onto the scene, the concept behind the XB-42, although appealing, is about to be rendered obsolete. Despite this harsh reality, Douglas does not throw in the towel on the Mixmaster. A plan is hatched to convert this plane from a military bomber to a commercial airliner, the same way the DC-3 was successfully converted into the C-47. Before jet technology reigns supreme over the civilian transport market, the centerline thrust principle can hopefully be the bridge between winged propellers and jets. Suddenly, the XB-42 is converted into the DC-8 Skybus. It is marketed for short and medium-range flights, promising to carry twice the amount of passengers at half the cost per available seat mile of the DC-3. Its sleek and unorthodox design symbolizes the brave new world of the 1950s, where people are willing to experiment with new concepts and ideas, hoping that technology can change their lives for the better. Having the comfort and luxury of previous Douglas designs, along with this new technology, it is hopefully a winner in the eyes of Pan Am and TWA. A marketing campaign is launched in hopes that the big airlines purchase these Skybuses the same way they rushed to the DC-3 during the 1930s. Sadly, this advertising blitz ends in failure for Douglas. A key sticking point is the plane's price tag. Using a more complicated arrangement than the XB-42 Mixmaster drives the cost of development through the roof, with the DC-8 Skybus priced at $100,000 more than its nearest competitor. Because of its astronomical cost, there are no takers in the airline business. The plane is scrapped by Douglas, who never again pursue this centerline thrust principle. And once jet technology arrives on the scene, the idea is considered out of date by the industry. The only artifacts that exist of this plane are mere drawing board designs. For Douglas Aircraft, just like with their XB-19 bomber, it is a miss, being at both the wrong place and at the wrong time.
In the Atlantic, serious damage was being caused by German U-boats. To meet the menace, B-24s were assigned to the Anti-Submarine Command. The number of German submarines harassing our convoys began to decline.
Well, our problem was in our training on our submarines in Germany. We had the problem that we never knew what new technology we would be confronted with when we were out there. All these things like radar and covering the black hole, all these things came as a surprise to us. We could not really prepare for it. And the big weapon, of course, which was devastating to us, was the development of radar and its use by airplanes. That caused an enormous amount of losses in the German submarine fleet, from which it really never recovered. Airplanes in general, whether they were Liberators or the flying boats, whatever airplane, it was for us a matter of life and death somehow to escape from their attacks. And the problem for us was that the enemy, our enemy at that time, had developed this practice of scanning the horizon in an airplane for submarines at the surface. And if they did not find one, they switched the radar off and flew another 100 miles or something like that before they switched it on. And at that particular time, very often they had a submarine right there in their sight, and gave the submarine very, very little time to submerge. So any airplanes, whatever they were really our big threat, and diminished our chance of survival. The only way how we survived then later on the U-190 is by using the snorkel, which enabled us to stay submerged continuously so that we could not be discovered by airplanes anymore. And that is more or less what enabled us to survive. In the last year of the war, German submarine was not allowed to come to the surface during daytime anywhere north of 15 degrees south of the equator. So we just stayed down and out of sight.
As Nazi forces take over Western Europe, the tiny nation of Denmark cannot escape German occupation. Realizing that its northern territory, Greenland, could be up for grabs, the United States acts swiftly and organizes a treaty to be signed between themselves and the Danish government in exile.
This agreement between the United States and Denmark relating to the defense of Greenland is by now known to my countrymen in Denmark. Sitting by their radios under the blackout that covers Denmark now, they will have heard the President's statement. And they will have felt grateful and encouraged when the President expressed his hope for a speedy liberation of Denmark. And they heard the President's assurance that Greenland will remain Danish. In this world of broken treaties, they know the word of the American people and their government can be trusted.
In April of 1941, America takes over the defense of Greenland, fearful that the Germans will use the territory for its natural resources and as a base to stage U-boat attacks against United States shipping. With the Nazi threat removed after 6 long years of fighting, the Soviet Union now becomes the biggest threat to America. With the closest route for Soviet bombers being the polar region, and the halfway point between Moscow and New York being Greenland, this Danish territory takes on a whole new level of strategic importance. Authorized by the Truman administration, work begins on building a top-secret airbase out in the brutally intense weather of Greenland. Known as Operation Blue Jay, the Thule Air Base is completed in 1953, after 2 years of painstaking development, becoming a shining example of American ingenuity.
Vast, inaccessible reaches of the frozen Northland assume new importance as news comes of a strategic air base only 900 miles from the North Pole. This nation's greatest military secret since the mounting of the Normandy invasion, construction of the base at Thule in Greenland was begun 18 months ago. While not fully completed, it is ready and working. Northernmost outpost of our jet fighter defense and an obvious staging ground for our intercontinental bombers.
The territory also becomes home to one of many radar stations that make up the famous DEW Line, and the site for numerous American Army exercises.
It's a long way from home for the 82nd Airborne, winding up 2 weeks of sub-zero training and indoctrination with the 1st Airborne operation north of the Arctic Circle. The Joint Air Force and Army maneuver brings to the highest peak modern tactics for combat at the top of the world. Something new for this frosty wasteland where mere survival has always been a full-time job and warfare unknown. But war today is no respecter of geography. The mock battleground is a frozen fjord, a layer of ice 55 inches thick. Sounds cold, looks cold, it is cold.
Strategic Air Command is based at Thule, with many of the Cold War's most famous bombers being stationed in this Arctic wilderness. The B-36 Peacemaker, the B-47 Stratojet, and the B-52 Stratofortress will, for a time, be based on this vitally important piece of real estate. As the threat changes from bombers to missiles, the B-Muse early warning system is also built inside Greenland in order to detect any approaching Soviet ICBMs, so that they can hopefully be stopped before landing on major North American cities.
While still thousands of miles away, the missiles would be detected by B-Muse, the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System. Instantly, B-Muse would flash the warning to NORAD and to MAR, indicating the speed, direction, and number of attacking missiles. MAR would then detect, track, and identify the real warheads from the decoys in microseconds.
Thule becomes a symbol of American Cold War defense. However, on January 21, 1968, a B-52 plane carrying 4 hydrogen bombs crashes in Greenland, causing the death of 1 crewman and widespread radioactive contamination. The news of this broken arrow reaches all the way up to the White House.
The crash of the B-52 carrying nuclear weapons late yesterday afternoon. During the night, our people and states worked with representatives of the Danish government on a news release which is scheduled to be put out at 10 o'clock this morning, which simply acknowledges that a B-52 carrying nuclear weapons, all of which were unarmed, crashed, and we anticipate no danger from it. It crashed, as you probably know, 7.5 miles from Thule, Greenland, on the ice. It burned. It either all or in major part fell through the ice into 250 feet of water. The Danes have an election tomorrow. Today is the last day of the campaign. The statement made is sensitive in relation to the election. I think the Danes and state and we are all in complete agreement on what should be said. I'm told by our people, inclusive of Harold Brown and others who are familiar in detail with nuclear technology, there is no danger from this.
A massive cleanup effort follows. However, many questions still surround this crash and the nuclear weapon that is unaccounted for in one of the worst environmental disasters of all time.
In 1952, the Korean War had turned into a stalemate. But during that time, the North Koreans were launching a series of offensives. And one tool that they were using was a dam called the Hwachon Dam. It's a dam that goes into a river, and because they control the waters of the dam, the North Koreans could choose to either hold back the water to increase their ability to advance on the UN troops, or they could flood. They could release the water and have it flood the UN positions. So at any rate, it was important that the Hwachon Dam be taken out or controlled. The initial thought was to send in a group of Army Rangers to briefly capture the dam and disable the controls. That was unsuccessful. A second attempt was high-level bombing of the dam to try to take out the control gates for the dam. That was done, but that was unsuccessful. So finally, the job was turned over to U.S. Navy carriers and air groups. And they attempted to send in, they did send in flights of Sky Raiders and Corsairs, literally to bomb the gates of the Hwachon Dam. Now, this is a concrete dam, a massive concrete dam, and it was clear pretty early on that they could drop the bombs, but it would only make a minute dent in the dam. Now, the leader of the flight was a pilot named Swede Carlson, who was a World War II veteran and a torpedo bomber veteran. And he realized that they might have a chance by using old aerial torpedoes and basically making a torpedo run on the gates of the Hwachon Dam. Went back to the carrier and found out that stored in their magazines were some old Mark 13 aerial torpedoes that had originally been intended for World War II use. They brought these torpedoes up on deck. They managed to rig them to Sky Raider aircraft. And on this particular mission, Swede Carlson led a flight of aircraft that, flying through anti-aircraft fire, made a torpedo run on the gates of the Hwachon Dam. Now, this was in ways much easier than a typical torpedo run because they didn't have a moving target. But at the same time, they had to fly at low level, and there was anti-aircraft that was going to be firing at them as they went in. So they did go in. They dropped, I believe, 8 torpedoes. 6 of them actually connected with the dam gates and punched holes in the gates. It didn't totally unleash the water, but it kind of unleashed it in a controlled fashion, so that the North Koreans no longer had that as an advantage during their offensive. So the name of the squadron is VF-192. They retitled themselves the Dambusters.
When I landed in North Africa, we had to walk from Philippines into a Corps reinforcement unit, and that was about 10 miles inland. And I said after that, now, when I had landed in Italy, went to Toronto, they said they're recruiting for the parachute regiment, you know. I said, well, that's for me. I'm not going to do any more marching. So that's actually that's the truth. That's why I said that I didn't want to be marching 10 miles. Now you think of guys during the war that were marched into action, you know, marching about maybe 5 or 10 miles or something, and go right into action. That was horrible, you know. You're tired when you get in there, you know. But I didn't want to go through all that. So that was my reason for joining the parachute regiment. I never wanted to be in the gliders because there's a big risk there. If you went down on the glider, you went down, you know. The parachute, at least you had a chance. But if a glider went down, the whole lot of you went down with it, you know. And then they carried a lot of armour in the glider too. That maybe have a couple of jeeps in there or anti-tank guns or something like that. And if you had a hard landing, you're more than likely to get hit with one of them, you know. We dropped from a platform. Like in the training?
Yes.
Yeah, we had a platform. We were in Italy at the time. That's when we trained. We had a platform. I know that in England they had towers. They had some sort of a tower. They used to drop from the tower. We never had. Everything was improvised, you know. You do 7 to qualify, and then you do a couple of drops for strategic drops, you know. And then after that, you just do 1 in Greece, 1 in France, and 1 in Greece, 1 in France, 1 in Palestine. That's all. On the bottom of you had a mortar and so many bombs, but I carried the bombs on myself. And when you go down, you have a strop, and the mortar is on a strop. And when you go, you're supposed to let the mortar go before you land, let it down. It'll be down there before you. And of course, I let mine slip. And when I got down there was no mortar. It had gone because I had drifted. It broke off, and I had drifted so many, maybe, God knows how far. I couldn't tell you how far I drifted, but there was no mortar. The only thing I found then was on the ground. I found a thing belonged to an American, because we were kind of a mixed drop, Americans and British. And I lifted up this, I had a .45 pistol that some of the Americans had dropped. I had that. And a kind of not a smock, it's, you know, like, it goes over your head and it's got a pouch in the front and a pouch at the back, and I had that. That's all the equipment I had. Yeah, it's a 3-point thing. You fire one for distance. Then the second one you find, maybe, if you got your distance, then the second one you fire maybe would land to one side or right or left. And that's the way you had 3 points. And then usually you would get distance and side point, and then you go through the middle, then that's the way, 3 points, and then you would, for your sight. I actually did hit a guy one time on a roof. Now, I don't know whether I killed, I can't say I killed him, but he wasn't there anymore. He was a sniper. And you know what do you call it, for a roof, for a flat roof, for the water coming off the flat roof. Well, he was down on that for the water come out, you know, and he was sniping from that. And this officer was with me. He said, he's up on the roof there, and he's just right behind that. And I was dropping, he says, get a bead on him and see if you can drop him. And I dropped one short, and the next one, he says, I think you got him. I don't know to this day if I got him or not, but he never fired after that. The Americans have had the second shoot. We didn't have them. If your chute didn't open, that was it. You had a, what was it, a Roman candle.
What you do?
All the way down. And I remember one guy, he was from Ireland too, an Irish guy. He had a Roman candle, he dropped, chute never opened, And another friend, he was a Lance Corporal. And before they used to carry supplies to Yugoslavia, and they carried batteries and everything for cars and all that sort of stuff for the partisans in Yugoslavia. And some of the stuff must have got on the strops. See, you had a strop on your chute, and when you jumped, you didn't pull a cord. It was pulled for you by the strop. and somebody asked it from the batteries that they were carrying over to the partisans in Yugoslavia, must have got on the strops, because one friend of ours, Lance Corporal, he dropped and it broke. That's the only one I knew, yeah. And another guy, a young fella from Ireland, Paddy Walton, and Paddy dropped. He was the same. His chute never opened. And he was built like a little ball, you know, great fighter, you know, boxer. He wasn't a boxer, he was a fighter, you know. And poor old little Paddy got killed, yeah. You seem to go with the flow, you know, you don't, it doesn't seem to bother you, you know, you're hoping that when I do land, everything will be okay, you know, that you have the confidence, you have that confidence in yourself that everything's going to work out, you know. You never think of getting killed or anything like that. I used to think that dying is the same thing as parachuting, you know. When you jump, when you go into the final dive, you know, if you get that little tug, you know you're okay, you know. But if you don't get the tug, you know you're going all the way down. I know, when I dropped, our drop was on, we were supposed to take a hill called Hill 30, Hill 30. Maybe it was 130, I'm not too sure, but I know it was 30. I have all the information at home in books, you know, and it was trees, and we dropped in there, and there was Americans, there was a mixed drop with Americans and British. And when we got in there, that's the only time I was really scared, because we were on a hill. And I thought if the Americans have got artillery, the first thing they're going to hit is the hills, you know, what we had dropped. But it turned out it didn't work out that way. Then I met an American, he came up the hill after, and he said to us, he got a bottle of whiskey, he says, but it's in my pack down at the bottom of the hill. And of course, the guys right away said, whereabouts? They were going after the whiskey. We were going through houses, you know, and if there's a row of houses, and you know there's somebody up at the top of the end of the row, and they get there, they do what they call mouse holing. You go to this house, into the next house, and keep mouse holing until you get down in line with the house that maybe there's a sniper down there or something. Yeah. And one fella, he was trying to get through, he had a pickaxe on the back of his pack, and he was trying to get through the hole. That's the way we were going to go down the street. And the pickaxe, when he get through, the pickaxe he couldn't get through it. And he said, the guy pulled him back, and he said, let me go through. He got through, and there's a guy waiting on the other side and shot him right through the head. Talk about, you know, kill him right there. Look at the draw. Yeah, look at the draw. We had another friend of ours too, if you want to hear look at the draw. We had a fellow called Dinger Bell. He was a sniper. And he was up in the window. This is school, this was in Greece. And he got up in the window, and he had the snipers right with the telescopic lens and the whole bit on it. And he was in the window there trying to pick somebody off. I could see somebody. Another fellow called Dinger Bell. And Dinger come up and he said, let me have a go with the sniper's rifle, you know. So Dinger said, okay, and he gave him the rifle. And no sooner he gave him the rifle, bang, Conliffe got shot right through the head. There was a guy who had a bead on him. But talk about luck, you know, he just stepped away and the guy got shot. A friend of mine, I have it back in Belfast or in Northern Ireland, and I have a medal. He sent me a medal. And you have that, you wear that medal if you go into a parachute club. If you don't wear the medal, you have to buy a drink. See, it's a catch-22. So I have the medal, I keep that close. Somebody asked me, is that for bravery? I said, no. It's to save money.
Leon Evans, Chief Pilot for the Canadian Warplane Heritage. It's his responsibility today. He's at the controls. As look at how perfectly, majestically beautiful the Lancaster returns to Earth.
I started, my love of flying went back before I went to public school. But I grew up through the Air Cadets, got my flying licenses, and as an instructor in St. Catharines for many years, and then joined Air Canada. I was a pilot with them all my life. But I stayed current on tailwheel aircraft. I've always loved the tailwheel aircraft. And checked out on Harvard's about 1998 down in Tilsonburg. Came here in 2000, and I've never looked back. I was very fortunate here because I had enough hours of experience and time on aircraft that the CEO, Dave Rohr, gave me the opportunity to jump into different aircraft. And the first one I jumped into was a Beech 18. I had a good instructor there. And I moved up to the DC-3. And then one day he just said, we need somebody on the Lanc and you're the man in line. Sometimes you're in the right spot at the right time. You know, you look at it, first of all, you see that huge bubble canopy up there. It's a greenhouse in the summer. We sweat. The Brits were worried about the heat too. They were trying to keep warm in the night bombing raids. We're trying to keep cool. You notice the big long bomb bay doors. They're 34 feet long. They were designed that long to carry the huge bomb that it was designed to carry, the Grand Slam. You also notice the fact you've got 3 turrets. Where's the bottom turret? Some of the airplanes had a ventral turret that was remote controlled and could move up and down. They decided after they installed them in a couple of hundred aircraft that, no, we don't need that. 60% of the Lancasters were shot down because fighters could get in underneath. There was nobody there to shoot at them. Yeah. They could hide there, blow the tail gunner out of his seat, and now you got the airplane whenever you want. Yeah. It was, and also the Brits, of course, used .303 caliber guns instead of the Americans used .50 cal. The Germans went right to cannons right off the bat, and that's an effective gun. The other things you notice, well, the 2 big main tires they're 5 feet tall. Yeah. You know, they're huge. Only 50 pounds of pressure. So it'll roll on grass, and when you look at the wheels, they're supported by 2 oleos with a floating axle, so the wheel can actually, so you're going over hill and your airplane's rocking back and forth, the wheel stays vertical. Yeah. As far as I'm concerned now, it was all about engines in World War II. Yeah, the Lancaster was beautiful, but it started off as a 2-engine airplane with Vulture engines. They didn't work. They went to the Merlin, which was dedicated to Spitfires and Hurricanes and Mosquitoes. But the engine that the Spitfire used, the 2-speed 2-stage, that was the Mark 9 Spitfires and up. And how they came up with that, they got the Mark 5, which had the same engine basically as the Lancaster, single stage 2-speed. Those were the Mark 45 Rolls-Royce engines. They had a 2-stage, 2-speed supercharged engine, and they were designed. That was going to go into the Wellington bomber. They were going to make it a supercharged bomber. Yeah. When the Focke-Wulf 190 came out, the Mark 5 Spit couldn't handle it. So they said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take that new engine with the new supercharger, not the new engine, but the new supercharged engine. We'll put it in a Mark 5. We'll call it a Mark 9. That turned out to be one of their best Spitfires. Yeah. That's how they handled the Focke-Wulf, and the Focke-Wulf couldn't handle that. Yeah. I've had this Lancaster right out to Calgary. I've been down the East Coast to New York State. Been down as far as Virginia, where we landed on grass, which was fantastic. That was a lot of fun. That's what the airplane was designed to do, we travel all over. And that airplane, don't forget, the Lancaster will hold 2,154 gallons, imperial gallons. And at that weight of fuel, that amount of fuel, burning 250 an hour, you got yourself a long range. Yeah, you do. Yeah. We came up yesterday flying with a B-25. We had a Mustang dancing around us and a B-29 out there. And I thought, nobody's shooting at us. We just have to make sure we don't touch each other. But nobody's trying to kill us. And the airplane certainly isn't. And we're having a wonderful time. And it's a great thrill. And it's an honor to be able to fly these things in remembrance of the people who went before us. And I mean everybody, the crews and the people that built them. I'm working on a Bolingbroke over here on Winters, and this is the forgotten bomber. And one of the gentlemen working with, well, several of them have been working on it for 25 years. It will fly one day, yep. And it'll be the only one flying over here. And a lot of people flew those airplanes and lost their lives in them. They just weren't ready for World War II,
During World War II, the train, a mode of transportation that had been slowly dying with the ascendancy of both the automobile and the plane, made a remarkable comeback. Carrying supplies and troops from one end of the United States to the other, millions of Americans would rediscover the rails.
I think we're headed to San Francisco because now we are in Tennessee. No, Tennessee's not there, it's down here.
With both gasoline and tires being rationed, getting around by train became the only option for the majority of people. Throughout the 1930s, as the Great Depression was being felt in every section of the country, railroad passenger miles never exceeded 26 billion. In 1944, that number had shot up to 91 billion. In terms of freight, over 70% of the materials used against Germany and Japan were shipped by trains, peaking at 714 billion ton-miles by 1944. It became the heart and soul for the arsenal of democracy.
This war is going to go on. Coal will be mined no matter what any individual thinks about it. The operation of our factories, our power plants, our railroads will not be stopped. Our munitions must move to our troops.
However, this rebirth would be artificial with the end of the Second World War. As Americans returned to their daily lives, the demand for hauling freight declined drastically, never being able to reach the records it set during the war again. And in terms of passenger service, the railroad faced a daunting foe in the city of Detroit. Churning out new model cars year after year, Americans, enjoying a period of post-war prosperity, would choose the automobile as the preferred mode of transportation for shorter distances. By 1960, 74% of families living in the United States owned at least one car, a luxury only a generation before. And with the creation of an interstate highway system, people could now travel coast to coast on their schedules. But the biggest nail in the train's coffin was the aircraft. At first, many railway executives thought that with the competition being weather-intensive, they could still hold on to a substantial share of the passenger market. As airplanes endured 10 times the fatalities, the hope was that many people would think twice before boarding a plane. And with new luxury passenger cars, the train with its illustrious history could still hold on in this rapidly changing marketplace. Unfortunately for the railroads, the exact opposite transpired. Before the war, air travel had accounted for just 2% of intercity passengers. By 1957, they were now the leading common carrier in terms of revenue passenger miles. With planes being powered by jet engines and airport construction continuing at a rapid pace, consumers chose to fly to their target destination in droves. A new undisputed champion was being crowned. Unable to compete with either mode, passenger service plummeted from 91 billion miles in 1945 to just 11 billion by 1970. The trains that had built America, linking the two oceans together, was eclipsed by the airplane, which would dominate the market to this day.
May Day in Moscow. This year's parade through Red Square is a 3.5-hour affair with emphasis on peaceful coexistence. Soviet films emphasize the doves, athletes, and children, and omit the rockets and military hardware. A few days later, in contrast to the officially directed smiling mood of Moscow's May Day festivities, as appropriate for the upcoming summit talks, came a major governmental shakeup, tightening up Khrushchev's control of the hierarchy. Then Khrushchev's shocking announcement: a United States Air Force plane shot down on Russian soil, reportedly an ultra-secret high-altitude reconnaissance craft.
May 1st, May Day, Francis Gary Powers, piloting one of our U-2s, is shot down over Russia. This creates a tremendous international incident and scuttles the upcoming Paris peace conference. It's a major, major embarrassment to the Eisenhower administration.
On display in Moscow, the wreckage of pilot Francis Power's U-2 reconnaissance plane for Muscovites and foreign newsmen to see as the Soviet launches its most belligerent anti-American propaganda barrage in recent years. The spy plane incident on the eve of the summit was seized upon by the Kremlin and blown up to proportions that startled and shocked the outside world. Khrushchev himself at the Moscow press conference loosed a furious tirade, charging America with deliberate aggression and threatening to attack any Allied bases from which U-2 jets flew over Russia. Hopes for the success of the summit talks even then grew faint. It was clear at the time that Mr. K was laying groundwork for a clash in which the actual issue would be his demands on West Berlin.
The Powers episode is spectacular in every way, shape, or form, especially when you see the Soviet archives of little Nikita Khrushchev there in the big airplane hangar pointing out all the artifacts of the plane. It's sensational, and it comes at a really, really important moment in the Cold War, where the Soviets have engaged in a few years of détente with the West, trying to engage the United States in particular.
In regards to the U-2 shoot down, Eisenhower at first doesn't quite know how to respond, but then he acknowledges the fact that it was our plane.
When we admitted publicly that the U-2 belonged to us and it was on a reconnaissance mission, we were doing something that in a modern world, that was the only way we could find out, get any information on about a closed society. And a society that is constantly threatening us by their strength, boasting about what they could do to the world and all the rest of it. Now, this does not put the United States on trial whatsoever. If they want to say that they putting me on trial, that's their privilege. But to put the United States on trial in this way is just another piece of their propaganda.
And oddly enough, his telling the truth infuriates Nikita Khrushchev even more. Because Nikita Khrushchev, being a born and practicing liar, expects Dwight Eisenhower to lie about it. And that he tells the truth, and tells the truth that the United States has been able to fly over the Soviet Union for so long and so safely, really ticks him off.
Pessimism was in the air as Khrushchev arrived in Paris. On arrival, he denounced certain influential circles, in his words, who were preventing the improvement of the international climate. It was clear that the emotional Russian premier was in an ugly mood.
So, here, when the Gary Powers episode is shot down, there may have been some concern that we don't play this at all. We just shut up, let it go, release him in exchange for spy, all quiet. But he doesn't. He goes public. And it speaks volumes about the nature of his own regime, about the frustrations of the Soviet Union in places like Berlin. It's behind the queue in terms of technological capabilities. So it's a gamble and a way of sort of taking that shine off of the United States by revealing them to be sort of dastardly spies while we're talking in Paris.
In Moscow, Nikita Khrushchev is shown as he told the Soviet Presidium that pilot Gary Powers of the downed American reconnaissance plane was alive, and that Russia had seized spy photographs made 1,400 miles inside Soviet borders. The plane was brought down on May Day, less than 2 weeks before the summit talks, and Mr. K was picked to play on the incident for propaganda advantage. Out in the open came the story of the most sensational intelligence operations yet revealed. America officially admits extensive flights over and around Russia by unarmed planes during the last 5 years. State Department spokesman Lincoln White gives the reasons for the flights.
That given the state of the world today, intelligence collection activities are practiced by all countries, and post-war history certainly reveals that the Soviet Union has not been lagging behind in this field.
December 1937. With the Japanese capturing Shanghai and raping the capital city of Nanking, an American gunboat anchored in the Yangtze River is dealt a fatal blow. The USS Panay, stationed outside the immediate war zone and clearly marked with American flags, is attacked mercilessly by Yokosuka biplane bombers of the Imperial Japanese Navy.
Other Japanese planes have joined the fight with bombs and machine guns. Even the loaded lifeboats are targets for the war-mad Japanese machine gunners. the riddled Panay bears her wounds bravely, but she is doomed without question.
By the time the dust settles, 2 Americans are killed and 30 are wounded. Back in Washington, President Roosevelt demands to see film taken during the assault. After viewing it alongside Secretary of State Cordell Hull, both agree that the hour-long bombing of the Panay is no accident. Despite Japanese claims to the contrary, this incident is seen by Roosevelt as a deliberate act of aggression, done by a nation that is gobbling up the continent of Asia at an unprecedented rate. Despite calls by Secretary of the Navy Claude Swanson to immediately declare war on Japan, FDR, knowing that U.S. forces are too small, as well as fearing an isolationist backlash, decides to accept Tokyo's apology. Given a bill for $2 million, reparations are paid promptly by the Japanese government, and the incident is all but forgotten for nearly 4 years. In retrospect, the sinking of the Panay would serve as a warning for a larger-scale attack, conducted on December 7, 1941.
Aviation, the art of aeronautics, began with the dreamers, inventors, and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth, and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunderchief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter, was critical in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavyweight fighter, was used extensively in the same war. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is a close air support icon. The Messerschmitt Me-262 marked a leap forward in aviation technology. Each of these game changers were instrumental in their eras, and their legacies still resonate today. Beyond the game changers, there are those that have transcended their practical roles to become icons. The Concorde was not just an aircraft, it was a supersonic symbol of luxury and speed. The B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber, is an icon of power and resilience. These magnificent machines and others like them have become much more than just aircrafts. They are enduring icons that encapsulate the audacious spirit, the relentless innovation, and the boundless ambition that define the world of aviation. For more amazing aerial footage, and to join us in this incredible journey, check out the DroneScapes YouTube channel.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.